Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, Demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons have finally got out of half rat power and lifted above 70% and are now 80 to 90% better than the rest of the competition. Well, at least that's what my random David King quote generator is saying. But in all seriousness, the Demons displayed their devastating best in their premiership quarter and blew the Giants away. Be very afraid of this team. George is laid out this week, but joining me tonight is once caller to the show and now an integral part of the lineup, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. Terrific game. I went to my first game of footy at the G since July last year when GWS beat a very flat Melbourne because we were loading up, and completely different experience on Saturday night. Fantastic. Great to be back at the footy and just love it.
That game you're talking about, I think, scarred me because when I saw we're playing GWS, there's memories of losing to them came flooding back. So, but I'm glad that we got the job done and we did it well. And I think the theme that we will see develop over the season is one of ruthlessness, and it was that ruthlessness began at the selection table. None of us on this program, the experts that we are, Bimanda, thought that we would recall Premiership defender Harrison Petty into the side after only one game at Casey. Yet the D selection committee, who have the unenviable task each week of having to pick a bunch of talented players all putting their hands up, they pulled the trigger on Adam Tomlinson ruthlessly, whose place in the team last season was cruelly ripped from him when he suffered that season-ending ACL, leading him to miss out on premiership glory. And, we also had the option of bringing Joel Smith back into the side, and neither Smith nor Tomlinson had really put a foot wrong this season. They've admirably stood in for the likes of Petty and Lever during their early season injuries. And Petty, he was an integral part of the final series last year, the premiership win, an integral part of the team that was so dominant throughout 2021. There are no questions that his place is deserved, and hence that theme of ruthlessness. Both Tomlinson and Smith, they're probably even way too good to be running around at VFL level, and that's no disrespect to the players in the VFL. It just shows how much depth we actually have when you can have two players like that who could easily slot into the team, sitting in the twos and might struggle to get a game, barring injuries.
You do. Yeah, I was amazed, as I said last week. I was amazed that Petty came straight back in, and at the game, the buzzword for me and my mates that I was with that was resilience. There was no thought about resting track, it would appear. Play through the injury, bring Petty straight back in. Rivers was straight back in when he was still sort of looking a bit proppy, and they've played him through that, haven't they? There's no seemingly thought about resting sore players at the moment. I thought it was not so much ruthlessness, because I think Tomlinson, as I predicted, was going to come out, but I thought Smith was the one who was going to replace him. So I was half right, but it just shows, one, I think that where they rate Petty. So he was always going to come back in anyway. So it was just forestalled an issue that, that just brought forward an issue that would have happened in a couple of weeks or even next week by the look of it. So, it probably, indication of a bit of their approach with injury, but also how critical they see Petty in. And I think we saw, didn't we, how well he sort of slotted back in that position. And there's a few comments flying around on Demonland, which I agree with, around that having him back in the side, Lever back in the side, really allows May to be a bit more aggressive and play up the ground more, safe in the knowledge that Petty's knows his system well and he can drop back. He can wax with Steve May about who goes higher up the ground. And often if you look at those high shots, it was just fantastic. I'll talk a bit about it later being at the ground, but you can see that he automatically drops back when May goes up the ground. And so he improves our side. So it's great to have him back in the side. He's a key player.
And a very huge welcome back to AFL level for Harrison Petty, because within 3 or 4 minutes of the game starting, the ball was coming in high and deep into our back line, and Petty backs himself to take a specky. And I just love that confidence to back yourself to take a mark in that situation, especially within a few minutes of being on the pitch for your first game for the season. It was a solid return for Pets. He did his job in defence. He pressured his opponents all night. 13 defensive half pressure acts, 5 spoils, 5 intercepts, 3 tackles, 2 intercept marks. Nothing flashy, but he forms an integral part of our miserly defence. And while we're on that miserly defence, and you mentioned Stephen May, kudos to him again, having a stellar game as the general in the back line. And as you mentioned, he's just flourishing with the return of Lever a couple of weeks ago, and now Petty back in the side. 24 possessions, 8 intercepts, 7 spoils, 6 marks, 5 tackles. And an interesting...
He was amazing, wasn't he?
He really was. Interesting stat about our defence popped up on Twitter. I didn't see the actual tweet, just a cropped screenshot, so I can't credit the author. And now that I come to think about it, I can't even actually verify the veracity of the claim. But I'll take it as gospel because it was on the internet, so it has to be true. The table listed each team's number of games played since conceding 100 points. And I think we were about 54 games since we conceded 100 points. And the next best was Brisbane on 10, followed by Sydney 7, and I think Carlton on 5, Freo and Gold Coast on 4. And the list goes on unimpressively for those other teams. Now, granted, 2020 was had shorter quarters, but that's still an absolute ripper stat, and all credit goes to our defence and the architects of that defence for putting together a system that doesn't just include our backline. The whole team is defensive-minded, evidenced by the defensive work of our forwards and our mids too, and their hard gut running to get back into position to assist our defence and help strangle teams into submission. And speaking of, go on, you want to say anything about our defence and just the team defence?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Andy, for interrupting.
That's right.
At the ground, so as I was saying, it was the first game I'd seen for, not far away from 12 months. And it's just such a pleasure to be at the ground to be able to see that, because you don't get a sense of that sort of swarming run, the back and forth. There was a chain where we broke back towards our goal and we'd push right up the ground, and the flood to come back was just something to see. And, it really, there's a few things that brought home to me. Is one, exactly as you say, is it's an all-team defence. And now I know we hear that all the time, and but at the ground you really get a sense of that everyone needs to be playing their part, and as much as anything, it's running, because and only one player out of the 18 on the field have got the ball in their hand at any given time or pressuring the ball carrier. The rest are doing that running up and down. But the other thing that it really occurred to me at the ground and really reinforced is how hard that work is for the opposition to stay with us and track us. They're an AFL elite team, had a pretty good team in. It's not like they, it wasn't a million miles away from their strongest team. Probably, as I say, probably most of their key players in, and it's early in the season, so they must be relatively fit in terms of, but they were gassed in the last quarter, and that coming to the end of each quarter, they were looking gassed as well, but they had just completely run out of gas in the last quarter, the Giants, and a big part of that must be having to run with us, and some of the vision I've seen on the shows just really highlights that, how much running ahead of players that we're doing and getting into space. And the commentators keep saying it's like we've got an extra player at the contest all the time. One of the
I can't remember where I saw it, but it was written about it that some of the GWS players were cramping. So they weren't just gassed, they're cramping. Yeah. So
3 or 4 players were cramping badly at the end of the game. And at one point, there was my player cramping who just couldn't get he couldn't go with them, and so he started cramping while we were still running ahead of the ball.
I think that was what's his name, Lucky Whitfield.
He got hurt. I think.
Was that hurt in that contest?
Yeah, I think so. But that we got a goal from that. I mean, I don't know whether maybe he was cramping, but he seemed to get hurt, and we ran away. And I think it was Oliver who ran off him, and that ended up being a goal. Just go back to Petty. The other thing that Petty is a hard footballer. He really smashed into Caniglio at one point. I thought he was really physical and really hard at it. So. I mean, some of the numbers were crazy. It was how efficient we were. We outscored the Giants by 65 points from intercept possession chains, which is apparently the best we've done in that stat since round 10, 2018. And we kicked the goal for everyone for every 21 disposals we had, which is just crazy. And for the Giants, we outscored from intercept possession chains by 65 points. And for them, that's the worst differential they've had from that since 2014, when they were in Strugglesville. I mean, so it just shows how. Such a key to our game is that turnover, as Ooze was saying on the interview we did with him. But they're crazy numbers.
Speaking of gut running, and I'll bring this up here, that gut running doesn't end with getting back and assisting with defence when we don't have the ball. There was a piece of play, and we've all seen it from the weekend, that involved Tom Sparrow. If you haven't seen it 100 times, jump on Demonland's Facebook, Instagram or Twitter and take a look. The whole sequence is phenomenal, and not just Tommy's gut run and tap and subsequent goal to Fritter. The whole sequence is a total team effort and embodies and epitomises what this team and the club is all about. It was just superb. The team is playing some great football, and it's not just our stars. It's the role players, and we mention them week in, week out, but it's guys like Tommy Sparrow and James Jordan, Charlie Spargo. They really elevate this team to elite levels, and I'll talk more about Charlie Spargo in my positives. He had a ripper of a game. And talking about ripper games, I thought Jack Viney played a superb game. Viney's contribution as the bull in the midfield is sometimes overshadowed by Petrarca and Oliver, but his contribution is in no way diminished. He often doesn't get the same numbers as the aforementioned players, but the grunt work and the second efforts are certainly appreciated and are an integral part of this formidable midfield. And we love a midfielder that kicks goals on this program, and Vines has kicked a goal in every single game this year. And whilst we're talking about raining goals, let's talk about every Demon fan's favourite quarter of football, and that is our third quarters, made famous in last year's grand final. Back in September, we went on a rampage, and that energy was bottled and released this weekend. The D's were just simply on fire, kicked 10 goals, 2 for that quarter, and just quietly welcome back accurate kicking for goal. George would no doubt be very pleased, as was I. Incredibly, we had 10 individual goal kickers in that quarter too. Jordan, Track, Pickett, he's third for the night, Nibbler, T-Mac, Maxi, Fritter, Viney, the undefeated Bowie with a long goal on the run, and the Weed. And that's my notes for the game. B-Man, any other general comments you want to mention about anything I've talked about?
No, just a couple of picking up a couple of your points there. One, it's spot on, that goal to that Sparrow set up was, you could have just drawn a picture of that and said that's Melbourne's game plan, because he started sort of on the half-back flank, not far from their defensive 50-metre arc. He ran the length of the ground to get that. The kick was the central kick was it wasn't a super well weighted, but he could have. It was a team kick into. It was Spargo, wasn't it, who kicked it?
Yeah, Spargo kicked it to Fritsch, who was sort of running towards him. Fritsch was coming from the 50 arc as well.
For goal there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He did the team thing and sort of tried to.
He did the team thing. He mishit that kick. But the team play was to do that. That's what they drilled. He missed it, and Sparrow, who had run from the halfback line to get onto that, and then to have the wherewithal to he's not the quickest player, but he completely outran his opponent.
But it wasn't just him running. track was running on the side of him and all the way down.
Yeah.
You only notice it later when after the goal kick, but Wiedemann was also running down on the other side because he was right there once the guy kicked it. So they were all streaming down the ground and running, all around about 100 metres, and Fritsch as well.
And then to sort of smash it back to have Fritsch. And then, that's been commented on a few times as well on the different shows. But the other Melbourne thing about that was they all went straight to Sparrow, to the goal kicker.
Well, they knew, and Fritsch knew too. He knew that the goal is Sparrow's goal. Yeah. And it had everything, didn't it? It was the sort of that hard defensive run. So our midfielder pushing back in defense, his ability to stay in the contest. If he'd not got that tap, it would have been unrewarded running. It was just that he got it. But as you pointed out, there were multiple players tracking that ball down the ground, including track, pardon the pun. And so it just had everything in it that was Melbourne. And just the other general thing about the game, I think that it's really important to put it in context that, the Giants came and gave their best crack. They played pretty good footy. We blew them away in that third quarter. As I said last week, I think the sort of weakness for them is they're tactically, they seem to me they're 10 years behind the game in some respects. They don't have that dynamic zone defense. They're a really sort of one-on-one team. Bruce was a huge out. So, but despite Bruce being out, they were up 12 in at the end of the first quarter in clearances. They were up in contested possessions. I think it was the end of the game. I think they 5 up for contested possessions. They had time in half was 70-30 in that first quarter, time in forward half. Some of the stats belied how, on paper you see the score and think, oh, well, Melbourne dominated that game. I thought, that they played a pretty good game of footy and they threw everything at us. We were just too superior. And it was, again, that similar of the Melbourne thing of, they had their best quarter in the first quarter and they just they didn't score. They scored, 5 points and we scored 4 straight goals, which obviously makes a big difference. I just think that turnover game, you can put a lot of emphasis on the defense, but it was really the mids putting pressure. So their kicking efficiency was only 38% forward to centre in that quarter, leading to all 19 of their inside 50s. We rebounded them. So 19 inside 50s, I think they beat us by 9 in that first quarter. We just bounced them straight back out. But they threw everything they had at us. So it wasn't as if, it was a team that didn't come to play and we just sort of toyed with them. That wasn't the sense at all. And, we had everything on our terms. It looked like our game. We were intercept marking, of course. And just back to Stephen May, he really tested his hamstring out a couple of times in that third quarter when he got the members in front of the members stand really up and about, where 2 repeat efforts where he spoiled within a minute of each other to put it over the boundary line was just brilliant. And in that first quarter, he had 7 rebound 50s in that first quarter, which is the highest amount of rebound 50s by a player in a first quarter at all this year. And it just shows what sort of form he's in, but also, that like how miserly we are with our defence and our attitude. So, just as a general comment, I think that it's easy to look back and think, well, that was a bit of a walk in the park. But, I thought the Giants certainly, they came to play and, their numbers right through the game, except for that third quarter, were more than respectable. And you'll just talk about May. Apparently he came into the game a bit crook. He'd either been crook on the Friday or the Saturday. I'm not too sure the timing of it, but certainly didn't seem like it. B-Man, you wanted to talk about discipline and the surge in our tactical segment of the show, so take it away.
Yeah, so the whole talk for years now, as Goody's promised to the fans, was that he would the D's were developing a game plan that was predictable, and we've talked about that. We talked about it, the percentages last week, that fans could come to the ground and know what they were going to get. And so even the most, the see ball, watch ball sort of fan would now know some of those things. But again, one of the things that you don't really see on telly that it was just brilliant to see at the ground was there's just so many small things that are critical to our game plan that I would call, put in the basket of discipline. And one of them is, as an example, is when they've got the opposition have got the ball in the channels on either side, and on the boundary line channel or on either side of the ground, and we've got a player on the mark. We always set up when they say stand as far to the centre as we can to encourage them to kick down the sides. So there's that discipline. But if you look, and you can't really see it on television, but at the ground you can see it, you'll always have at least one player on the 45 degree who's inside the corridor, often two or three, but at least one player. And that's such important bit of discipline to always have that, because it means that if they want to switch, they have to take that player on. And so one consciously, they're in the peripheral, so it makes it more difficult. But we got 2 turnovers directly from that on Saturday night, where they did take it on, and that player cut across to intercept. But it requires the discipline for every single time you have a stoppage and a player's got a free kick or a mark and he's going back, is that the person on the mark is in from it a bit to protect the corridor. And then you've got that player who's run on the 45. When I say 45 degrees from where the person with the free kick is towards their goal, in towards that centre corridor. And it means that corridor kick is so risky. And so many teams like to cross through there. We don't cross hardly at all, but except when it's go time. It just means that it makes that little more difficult. But it's really a discipline of someone doing it every single time. And there's any number of other examples you could look to in discipline. So one of the ones, and I couldn't believe it at the ground, is on their side, their lack of discipline, putting someone on that arc that Max Gawn was always going to run around with that goal that he kicked from outside or right on 50. You've got to protect that, and the D's always will. So we'll always have a player who's up on that line. In fact, I've seen multiple players, pointing and yelling at each other to switch on to cover that, so that the players, when they run around the fella on the mark who's on stand. So that's just another example.
I thought they did have a guy there, sort of running towards Max.
They had what's his name? The fellow who took the big screamer, Bobby Hill. Yeah. He was there, but he wasn't. It took him ages to get there. Yeah. And then if you look at the replay, he's hardly running flat chat at Max Gawn. Now Max Gawn, you only had to do any sort of vision of him in the last. He's kicked 3. That's a third goal he's kicked like that this year. You'd be running, sweating on it. You'd be right on that line, the umpire demanding you get back.
I guarantee next time he's having a shot from there, the team will have it. Well, they should, because they should be doing their homework.
They should. But that's discipline. And
yes.
So even things like kicking to the pocket, not breaking team rules, all of those little things add up. And so you don't, unless you're, they're sort of boring bits of footy, I guess, but that adherence to team rules. And there was one where there was a lack of discipline. Interestingly, I thought Cossie's it stood out for its lack of discipline, him not handballing on to Fritter, instead going for that was right on that line. It was an amazing kick, like it bent almost. It started off almost at the point post and almost hit the goal post. So it was an incredible kick, but it was definitely the handball should have been given to Fritter, and it just was almost like the exception to prove the rule about our discipline. It stood out so much that you see that all the time. The opposition taking shots where they should give it off. You see it hardly ever with Melbourne, and Fritter gave it to him as he should have.
I would have been upset. Obviously, if he got the goal. Take the goal, but I still, if I was a teammate, I would be upset, because really he should have handballed it over.
He absolutely should have, but it was that was a lack of discipline and that selflessness, but it was almost the exception that proves the rule. But as I say, there's heaps of other examples. Even the little things like helping players up off the ground when they're down, getting around players who've done a defensive act. being focused when you're manning the mark, that you're jumping in the air. There's a million little things that go to the way we play, and for any team when they're fully switched on, that are tiny things in of themselves, but they have to be done to be at the level we're at, and it's just the discipline to keep doing them. So you don't really see that as much on the television, but live you can just see it all over the ground. And the most one in the discipline is, as you noted, is the running. Is the running when it's not rewarded. So the running up and down of a Jordan or a Sparrow or Viney or that's a form of discipline that's required. And there's some vision. I happened to watch a bit of on the couch tonight. There was some vision of Darcy Parish for the Bombers, and they were stripping into him, basically showing his lack of discipline of that sort of running when no one's watching. And none of our players do that. So then the other one that tactically I just wanted to put on, this is really actually a question, because it's a question to which I don't know the answer, is that, again, if you look at our game, our game is built now on turnovers, always has been, but they're really emphasising it. If you hear the coaches talk, Uze as well in the interview we did with him, really emphasising we're a turnover team, obviously a defensive team, a defence first team. Now in footy, everyone's talking about, all of the sort of media analysts are post clearance, contested ball wins. That's us. It's us now and Freo with a very, very similar game plan to us, as I was saying last week. So, that those things are what we build our game on. But I was also reflecting that this idea of, us scoring quickly in surges, in bursts of goals, that's also a huge part of our game. So it's sort of, we're very difficult to play against because we're incredibly hard to score against. But the problem is, just like on Saturday night, within a blink of the eye, it was 14 points. The difference, it felt like within a blink of the eye, suddenly it was 31 points. It's like bang. And then when Melbourne get to 31 points, you go, well, that's game over. They're not going to lose the game from that point. But it's that ability to surge and put goals on quickly, which is a really defining part of the way we play. And what I don't know is how what happens? Like, how do they trigger that? Like, I think they sweat on turnovers. They put the opposition under such intense pressure. You could see it often. It happens all the time, but it happened a number of times where they just simply didn't want to go down the line anymore because they were, it was going to come back down the line. So they came inside, and we got 2 turnover goals exactly from that play where they decided to switch or even cut into the corridor, and we intercepted it. And so perhaps when they get that, they get the goal. But what I'd love to know from anyone who's watching or anyone who's got some ideas about this is, what then? How do they manage to so frequently kick 3-4 goals in a short period of time? Now, it's too many games in which it's happened for it to be a coincidence. And in that documentary about the grand final, I forget which one it was. I think it's the one on Fox, the first one. They talked about May had said to Oliver, talked about May telling them to stop scoring, and that he looked at track and said, "No, we're going to keep going." And then afterwards, May said, "We'll keep going." And so that implied to me that they have some capacity on the field to dial it up, to be more aggressive, to take higher risks. And I just love to know how they move from we're holding to, we're scoring now and we're going to score for the next 5 or 6 minutes. We're going to score multiple goals and then go back to holding. It's something that I've tried to watch it on the replay. It's really hard to see what the trigger is and how they do it. So, have you got any thoughts on that, Andy, about what the answer to that?
I have no idea. You're more cued into all that. I was just excited to see goal after goal, and I imagine for opposition teams it's demoralising when you have a team kick, 3-4 very quick goals. It was almost like in the grand final. No, I don't have any insight into that.
Yeah, sorry, Andy. I'm going to put it out there in Demonland and see what I can get back and ask some more of the astute punters out there. But yeah, if anyone listeners or anyone's got sort of any sense of how they do that and what the trigger is to do it, what mechanisms do they put in place to make it more likely that they're going to score 3-4 goals? Because as I say, it happens too often for it just to be a random event and we get on a run like other teams do. It's how we play. So like, that's what I'm saying, is about our model. It's an integral part of the way we play. And that's only become apparent in the last sort of 10, 15 games that we played. Previously, it was just like, oh, okay, great, we've scored a burst of goal. But if you look at, we break teams and then we either stop and we control it from that point on. But it's happened so often that it's clearly part of our game plan. And I'd love to know what the trigger is and how they do it on field.
I posted the Tom Sparrow thing on Twitter, and I don't know how it then got into Essendon supporters' hands, but a few people had retweeted and had said, this is to Essendon supporters. The first one, you won't catch Essendon doing shit like this, and embodies where we are as a team. Good players all over the park, don't play as a team. And then these other Essendon supporters tagged Essendon and said, show this to the players as to what gut running looks like. So it seems that we're catching the eye of some other supporters who want their team to play like us. And why wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you want teams to. I mean, we're the benchmark, aren't we? And for all the reasons we've talked lots about.
It's quite nice being that benchmark. I'm not used to it. All the radio, TV, they're all talking us up to the point where they're all saying it's our premiership to lose. And I don't, my MFC SS does not like that kind of talk. I like to be the underdog, but it's sort of hard. Well, it's not hard because I love hearing it, hearing the talk, but it's...
Well, for your MFC SS, to keep this in mind, is that I really think that we're the most dominant side since probably the 2019 or 2018 Tigers side, and before that Geelong and Hawthorn, and where there's a big gap between our best and the next behind us. But that's no guarantee. So the MFCSS to keep a hold of is the 2018 season by the Tigers. They went 19-3 in that season. We're by far the dominant side and lost in a prelim. That's the beautiful thing about AFL, is that you get all that way. That's why it's 2 seasons. It's, you get to the finals, you get through that first week, prelims are elimination. So, I think that, we're locked for finishing top 4. I wouldn't be surprised if we do go 18-4, something like that this season. We'll have our down patch like we did last year in the middle of the season around the bye as we load up, but that's no guarantee of anything come finals time. So we get a couple of key injuries, who knows? So, I'm not getting ahead of myself thinking grand finals in, but a top 4 is locked in, I reckon.
And on
Don't
any
book a holiday in September.
No, I've told my wife it's while we're up and about, there's no holidays in September. It used to be a staple. She could take it to the bank, but now not so much. I also had opposition supporters sort of say to me over the weekend, "Well, you've played nobody this year," and I was like, "Well, I can't help who we've been fixture to play against." If you look at the fixture at the beginning of the year, we've played out of our 5 games, we've played 4 top 8 teams, and we've had to go interstate twice. So it's not exactly so we're the only team that made the finals that have played, or anyone that has played 4 top 8 sides. Brisbane and Geelong and Sydney have played 3 top 8 sides. The Bulldogs and GWS have only played 2 top 8 sides. So, and a team like St Kilda, who's sitting in the top 4, have played no top 8 sides from last season. Now, I know it's all different. Who could have expected Freo to be 0-5, Bulldogs to drop off a little bit, and Essendon and GWS to sort of not make any improvements and actually go backwards. We can't help who we play. We can only beat who's put in front of us, and that's all.
Well, and I also think it speaks to what I was talking about last year, is that despite what the footy punditry were talking about, is it wasn't that even a season. There was a huge gap between the top two sides, three, or say top five, because Bulldogs finished fifth and the rest. That, you know, there was no one outside those top five sides who were going to win a grand final last year. And I think that gap has got bigger this year between us and the pack. Perhaps it's sort of Brisbane and, aren't that far behind as maybe that's equal as to they were last year. But I think, last season wasn't that competitive a season, and there was a big gap between the top sides and the middling side. So for me, that, you're right. We played all those, the sides that finished in the eighth. It's only the Suns who didn't so far. So that probably as much as anything an indication of where the competition's at. And I think the Suns will end up looking, they'll win their probably 12 games, and they won't be far off making the eight this season. So it wasn't a bad win. So, we've banked our wins early. It'd be really interesting to see how the other teams play us, because I think that Carlton will back their own system in to beat us. So will the Saints. Probably Collingwood will. So that'll be fun those games. The other thing about the Giants game, that they flooded back heaps, and you could really see that at the ground. They really tried to slow us down, similar to Essendon. But I'm thinking those other teams may not. And so they'll be, they'll want to, as I said last week, I think they'll want to take their best shot at us with their own game plan. I'm really looking forward, for instance, to playing the Blues, because they'll go at us, and even the Hawks, same deal. So,
all right, but we're not playing the Blues for a long time. I think round 22.
Once too,
yeah. Let's move on to positives. My positive this week, as I mentioned earlier, was one of our under-the-radar players, at least from the perspective of opposition supporters and even the media at times. Although, to be fair, Callum Toomey on afl.com.au did list Charlie at number 5 in the 8 things we learned from the round so far. He said, and I quote, "It's easy to get lost in the galaxy of stars at Melbourne, but Spargo is worth more recognition than he gets. It was evident again on Saturday night as the Demons trampled over Greater Western Sydney, with Spargo finding 22 disposals and a goal in another typically understated yet important role. Spargo's hard running up and down the ground and his forward pressure and sharp foot skills make him a crucial player in the Demons mix, even if the premiership player will probably never get the kudos for it externally. The best sides have always had their players who are more highly regarded within than from outside, and Spargo fits the bill in this dominant Demons outfit." End quote. It was one of Charlie's best games for the club, but having said that, we do see many of the aspects that made up Charlie's game this week, every single week. We see you, Charlie, and we salute you, son. Big man, Charlie Spargo.
Wasn't he on the back of some quiet criticism of both him and Cozzy's game in weeks, that they've got to kick goals, and you just got to listen to Goody. He even said it in the presser again, is that goals are bonuses. It's all of the things that they need to do to, all of those 1%ers and the gut running and their role. That's what they're judged on. I heard one of the players interviewed, I think it was Fritter actually, after the win, who said exactly that. He said that he was asked about Cozzy's game, but it's equally applicable to Spargo's game, about, he's getting up and kicking goals. And it was basically, well, look, the goals are the bonus. You play at that pressure and your goals will come as a small forward. But, if you look at the two different ways that, say, Hill played it okay for them, but doesn't put anywhere near the same pressure on as Cozzy or Spargs does. They just both had terrific games, but Spargo's running, at one point he tackled heavily. He tackled someone, got dropping the ball. He's up the ground, taking a inboard kick into our forward line just 30 or a minute later. It's incredible the sort of running he does. But he's got a really neat skill, a kicking skill that I love. He kicked one to Nibbler. I think Nibbler missed the goal, but where he can seemingly kick with the outside of his foot and put it into space. Very clever. I don't know if you remember it. He was kicking towards the punt road end, and he sort of, I don't know what you call it in golf. It would be like a fade, because it sort of comes not quite off the side of the foot, but drifts to the right. He's so clever. He did 4 or 5 of them where just little tiny short kicks where he got us out of trouble. So creative.
I've seen players sort of, as we're going forward, look for him to sort of give the handball off so that if he's free, that he can do that and give off that short pass or that, sort of accurate, shorter kick into our forward line because he does it so well.
And the other thing about Sparks, I love he's like he must be hard fella to pump up because when he does anything good, he looks bemused if anything. He gets down on himself, and he's pretty head down, and like he's another player who he played every game last season, did he? I don't think he. And so he's now up to I think. He's probably all of last season and this season not missed a game. Same with Track. Track hasn't missed a game since 2018, I don't think. So, he's a week in, week out player, Sparks. And, I agree. It was statistically, it was one of his best games, but also just to the eye, his amount of pressure he puts on. And he must be a real pest the way he's, hard to tackle and he has got a pretty good technique to drop and to draw that head high tackle, which you love it when your own team gets it. You hate it when you give them away.
You've listed a few positives you want to talk about, so take it away.
Well, yeah, with the 2 in 2 groups, really. So the overall positive, I just loved it. It was so great to be back at the MCG. It was, it was 26 degrees when I took my seat. There was not a breath of wind. The ground looked in magnificent condition. The top of the Ponsford was closed, so that was a bit of a bummer. So sat dead wing in the front of the president's lunch area or whatever you call that room up in the Legends area. A terrific sort of vantage view from up there, not quite as good as the top of the Ponsford, but what can you do? And so it was great to be back. And so the team positive from that was the fact that coming out in that third quarter, they played great the whole half. They really switched on. It was just a pleasure to watch such a good team. And, my friends and I were just shaking our heads at the thought of how many games we've been collectively to the MCG where, we're getting hammered by the Hawks or whatever, and just to see how good they are and how well things are operating. Their system is brilliant. They know it so intuitively well. It's just great to watch. But of course, you need quality players to take it to the next level, and just we've got quality across every single line. So the first half was fantastic. It never, they got to 14 points. It never felt like we were in any risk of losing that game. So that makes for a fun evening as well. But the third quarter was it was just demon heaven. And 10 goals, 10 different players. And apparently I was amazed that it even happened, but they said on the replay I watched later that it's the first time that's happened for 20 years. Well, it's a pretty rare thing. And I was trying to think, Andy, when was the last time we kicked 10 goals in a quarter? We didn't last year at all, did we?
No, it's been a while. I think we've done a couple like 7s, maybe an 8 or 6s, but not for a while. The most I think I've seen, did we kick 12 in the last quarter against GWS, I believe, early in their tenure as a team.
So it was just crazy to watch. It was fantastic. The crowd were up and about. Some of the goals in that patch were brilliant. It was just wonderful to be at the footy. The energy was up and about. There was a poor fella up and behind me who was the lone Giants fan, but it was a really phenomenal quarter of footy, and it was like we just flexed. It was like the sort of, I don't know, that's what got me thinking about the surge, but that was a surge for the whole quarter. It was almost as if they got fired up by that 50 metres for, and I know you want to talk about this,
we'll
but
talk about that.
So dissension or whatever the actual free kick was against, it turns out it was Oliver. No, I didn't, at the ground, I had no idea who it was, but on the replay, the umpire explained to Steve May that it was for Oliver's hands out, but apparently that seemed to kick us into gear, and it was like from that point, we were all over them. It didn't help for them. They got a 6-6. They had 2 6-6 free kicks, which is just, unbelievable. We got, at one point, we had 4 goals from 17 disposals. The first 4 goals of that quarter came from only 17 disposals. That's insane. 1 every 4 disposals is a goal. It was incredible. And even when they got a goal, we kept scoring afterwards. And in that quarter, we outscored them by 30 points from intercept possessions. That's our the highest third quarter differential for any game this year. I mean, 30 points from intercept possessions in a quarter of footy. It was a phenomenal quarter. It was awesome to be there and watch it. And just to think this is my footy team. We're just so good. And afterwards in the presser, I don't know if you've seen it, but the GWS coach, Cameron was just like, he didn't know what to say. He said the game was fine except for the third quarter. So that was my positive. The other positive I had was just on a kicking thing. The kicking was fantastic for the night, and just tactically it was interesting because they flooded back really hard, and Melbourne, at one point we had 10 marks before they had any, and some of them, 4 of them I think, or even 5 of them were intercept marks. So the rest we were really clever, is that they were flooding back, but we were super clever the way we used it. So lots of short kicks that hit targets, so that, really high number of marks for us, but that was part of the way we were responding to their tactical, what they brought to the game, which was heavy, really heavy flooding. But then the other so generally the kicking was fantastic. But the other thing that I just love it was when Fritter wheels onto his left foot, and that kick that he put out to TOB, it's a thing of beauty. The kick he put out in front of track to run onto it, where he marked and wheeled onto his left and dropped it in. That was just a phenomenally good goal. That was our first, I think. Just classy play, and his ability to sort of get that space and to weight that ball is just fantastic. What Fritz he does it 3-4 times a game. If they don't cover that side and there's players running free forward of the ball, he'll swing and roll onto that left foot every time.
All right, let's move on to improvements. My improvement this week falls on whoever came up with the dissent rule. Actually, it's not so much the rule per se, it's more to do with the interpretation of that rule and the inconsistency with which it's applied across the round and from week to week. And I don't necessarily disagree with the rule. I think that verbal dissent, and in particular any verbal and obviously any physical abuse, needs to be stamped out. And I'll bet that this rule at the AFL level is being used as a lesson for perhaps the amateur levels and most definitely the junior leagues. And I'm fine with the rule being applied to abuse or over-remonstrating. But where I draw the line is the thought policing or human nature policing of this rule, because naturally players are going to have a reaction to getting a free kick against them that they believe is unfair. It's impossible not to have that physical reaction by putting your arms out, whether it stems from frustration at themselves or believing they didn't infringe or the umpire got it wrong. A player putting their arms out in frustration, questioning the decision, it's not abuse. And I know they've branded it as dissent, but really they're trying to stamp out. They're calling that abuse. And I don't think that is, it's a natural sort of reaction to put your hands up like that. And I just think it's being over-policed. It doesn't mean the players are being abusive. As long as they don't go on with it, become verbal abusive or obviously physical, which I don't think they do. How is there anything wrong with that? There had to have been a memo that went around this week in particular to penalise players for gesturing, because it happened a number of times in a number of games, including twice against the D's. And we haven't seen this level of the rule applied since the heavy-handedness dished out at the Demons in the pre-season practice match. It's almost they've ignored it for most of the season. And what frustrates me more is the inconsistency that this was not applied every time a player remonstrated by gesturing in the round or even in this match. Because in our game, Petty, after the free kick against Jesse Hogan, he remonstrated. He put his hands out and then quickly put them on his head. And nothing happened. It was no different to any of the other gestures that incurred the wrath of umpires during matches this round or as we saw with Clary and all that. Harris Andrews' 50-metre was timid in comparison to the Carlton players' dissent that wasn't penalised at a crucial time in that match, and that could have had an effect on the outcome of the game if they'd given a 50 then. But like all rules, this one will be tucked away for another few weeks until the memo goes around again later in the year. So lift your game, Rules Committee. That's what I say, Bim Man. Rant over.
Dissension. This is like...
What is it? Is it abuse, dissension?
I'd personally be happy if Andrews gets... He's the only one who gets done for it. I can't stand the way he plays his footy. So I'd be personally happy if he wasn't allowed to do it, but everyone else was. In that Carlton game, Kennedy at one stage, he was beseeching, both hands out, beseeching, walking towards the umpire.
Yeah, aggressively.
Yeah. I mean, that's where, of any rule, it's where it's inconsistent.
Well,
that's
I have no problem
really,
if they're aggressive and flailing and running at the umpire. Then, that you can penalise that. But just to arms out, what? That's not.
Well, there was one today. I'm not sure if you saw it. There was one today. It didn't actually end up costing Hawks, but it certainly could have.
Well, there was
ridiculous. They weren't even putting up both arms. They were only both arms if you combine two players putting up one.
Well, there was that interesting one with when Hawkins took a dive. I'm not sure if that's the one you're referring to.
Exactly, that's the one. Yeah.
So then there were two players in the centre of the ground, just looking up at the screen and to watch the replay, and they obviously saw the dive of the century. Yeah. And if he doesn't get done for fined for staging, I'll eat my hat. And then the two players in the middle, the two Hawks players, sort of say to the umpire, "What? Look at that! Up 50 metres down the field."
Well, here's
that's
my
ridiculous.
Conspiracy take. As I said it last year. If you remember, I forget what the rule was. It'll come to me in a sec. Every year there is a controversial rule interpretation change. It happens every single year.
It happened with the
last year. I said half of the. Say again.
No, it happened with the the space. What do they call protected space?
Exactly. And last year there was another one. It was I think it was around the interpretation of holding the ball or something or other. Every year there's one, and I reckon it's a conscious, confected thing by the AFL to create some bloody news. So, every year for the last 10 years, there's been something in the middle of the season or at some point in the season. Is the game too slow? We've got to speed it up. Let's bring this in. It'll go the way. There's a whole lot of noise already about it. They'll come out and say, all right, hands up are okay or whatever. I don't know what they'll say. But it'll be tomorrow's chip paper wrapper at some point. So it's just, I really think the AFL look to create this sort of controversy under the guise of any good conversation, if it's keeping the AFL on the back pages.
I just think it's hard because it is sort of a natural reaction. So it's sort of, you can tell the players a million times, don't react, but it's sometimes human nature to just react, and sometimes it's out of frustration. I think in that Carlton game in the pre-season, one of our players got frustrated at himself, and it was track. I think he hit the ground because he was frustrated with himself. He got 50 metres for that.
Well, I think the silly part is that it's not. They shouldn't ping him for 50 metres for putting your arms out. They should. The key word that you said before is remonstrate. Like, there's a difference between doing that and remonstrating. Like the one, I don't know if you recall it, but the one, the Carlton, where Kennedy, he was remonstrating. His arms out, where he was beseeching the umpire, walking towards him.
Yeah, aggressive.
Sort of with his arms. Yeah, so that, I think that they just need to, and that's what they'll do. They'll come out and do, what we mean is they can't remonstrate.
Yeah, and I have no problem with that.
You don't need to define that and say what is remonstrating. Anyone can see what remonstrating is. And then it's up to the umpires' determination whether they think they're being remonstrated with or not. Well,
they were obviously, the memo went around this week because they were hot on that, and the memo was probably you have to award the 50 for this.
Yeah.
No matter what you think. You got room for improvement. It's hard to come up with room for improvements when you have a game like this, but yes.
Yeah, it was hard to come up, but my room for improvement this week is Melbourne fans. I was really, really disappointed that Jesse Hogan got booed. He elected to leave the club. Sure, it's tradition to boo players who have left a club, but he had a horrible couple of years or 3 years or whatever it was in that period in his life. His dad died. He had testicular cancer. He's away from his support. He made the decision to leave, which ironically, we were relatively happy with, and that enabled us to get Steve May. So we won out of that deal. History and hindsight would say it wasn't a great decision for him, probably, in terms of where he was at personally. He's taken time to recover. Didn't seem to be such a great move for him. He was a fantastic player at the D's. A lot of time for him, I just really didn't like the sort of booing that he got during the game. And so the improvement for me was Melbourne fans who booed him. Poor form.
Yeah, I don't like that either. I can understand when a player sort of does the dirty on you and leaves, maybe give a bit of a boo, but Jesse really sort of went with our blessing, the club's blessing. He wanted to get the best deal possible for us. We did, and we got Stephen May out of it, and arguably possibly a premiership along with it as a result. So, I don't like that booing of Jesse, sort of.
I felt for him at the ground because, to be honest, some of these things that the barrier for him being at the sort of elite level outside all the stuff that he dealt with, his body language was pretty poor early on. He didn't get hit up or the target was missed, or it was within the first couple of minutes. I thought that's not a great sort of start. It was always a bit of a problem. I thought when he was at the D's, his body language was variable. But I really felt for him. He must have, it would have been hard for him not to have thoughts about sliding doors, thinking, well, what could have been if I'd stayed in Melbourne? He had a good support network here, apparently. And, so after the game, I had my binoculars on him, and the team were really, the D's team were really getting around him after the game, and there was a clear affection for him. For the older players who knew him, not obviously players who didn't play with him, but for Gawns and Viney and, all of those sorts of players, Track, the clear affection for him. So, I was pleased that when he kicked that goal. So, pleased that he didn't kick us out of the game or anything. So, but I thought there might have been one where it was a bit funny. He got a free kick, which was marginal, and maybe the booing was about that, but he got booed at different points in the game, which, fine, you want to boo Scully, then go for it. But I don't think you'd boo Jesse Hogan.
No, not good enough. Let's move on to Casey. I didn't get to watch the match this week. Casey, with 16 AFL listed players in the team, led the unaffiliated Coburg Tigers all day, ultimately winning by 35 points. Casey have now joined their senior counterparts at top spot in their league on the ladder. I've read that they played some ugly football in some even more ugly conditions. Man, you just got to watch a little bit of it. Who impressed you for the Ds?
It was really just a shocking conditions. It was super, super windy. And, it's a real problem, I think, that them having to play so often in the wind down there, because it can't be it can't be easy to practice all your systems. And,
we train out there, don't we?
Yeah, we train out there. We can always go indoors there. We've got a big indoor area if it gets too windy. But we train there, but
but in terms of full match simulation out in the wind, it's...
Yeah. So it was super windy. I mean, the ball was getting blown back. It was going up in the air, and so it was a bit. I only watched about half of it. I thought Dunson didn't, again, in the bit that I saw, he didn't really, for me, set the world on fire. Van Ruin is he threw me for a while because he was wearing 42, and unless I'm having some sort of footy related dementia, I don't think he was 57 the previous week. So I was thinking, who's that strapping number 42? But he, like I said last week, he moved super well. I thought early doors, at least, Melksham, he he was leading our possession count at the end of the first quarter, 8 possessions. I'm not sure what he ended up with, but
21.
He looked like he was, he looked like he had the sort of intensity that you want him to have. And so I was pretty impressed with him, and he did a couple of really clever things. Despite the wind, his skills really came to the fore. And so, I think that he's a player. I still, if he can get that intensity level and get his head right, it must be hard for him. He's an excellent footballer. It must be pretty hard for him to be this far back from the best 22. But I'm still not writing him off. So 8 possessions for him was a great first quarter. And Bedford, in the again sort of pretty terrible conditions, I thought he was pretty strong as well. And interesting, it was last year Bedford keeps on getting selected again.
Yep.
Part of the Goodwin template is you just repeat things. Last year it was Jordan. How many games did Jordan be the Medi sub? And when he came in, Sparrow became the Medi sub and played a whole, and now this year it's Bedford. So, but the difference for this year is Bedford can be the Medi sub on a Saturday night and play a Casey game on Sunday. So he's not missing footy the way Jordan and Sparrow did last year. So just on Sparrow, Hamish McLaughlin called him Swallow during the call of that match, which I had to laugh with.
Must be listening to this podcast. Getting confused.
Must have infected him with some sort of Avery flu or something.
Well, let's go into our ins and outs changes for this week. It's very difficult to make any unforced changes to a team that has thrashed the opposition by 11 goals. However, we do have a premiership forward in Ben Brown that would be itching to get back on the pitch after missing 3 weeks for various things, COVID health and safety protocols. They're not sort of making it in time to be able to get onto the plane, and then a suspension. But he is back in contention. For me, the obvious change is a straight swap with Sam Wiedemann. I know that Goody usually doesn't make willy-nilly changes, but as we mentioned, particularly to a winning lineup. But if last week's change is anything to go by, with Petty sort of coming in for Tomlinson, I think we will be seeing Ben Brown line up at the MCG on ANZAC Eve against the Tigers. You got to put in your number one forward into a team. I don't think you can just have him playing out at Casey or missing entirely. So I think he has to come back into the team, big man.
Yeah, I think that I have no doubt. I had no doubt last week that Petty would get selected, but I have very little doubt that Brown will come back in. We've got to remember this game is a big game on our calendar. And they'll definitely, we'll talk a bit about it in a sec, but they'll definitely come with their heat, won't they, the Tigers? So, they're going to want Brown back in. They won't want him to play at VFL with no reason other than the fact that he makes our team better, but I hate for him to go back and get injured or report it again at VFL level. So get him into the ones and he'll definitely come back in. It's definitely Weed will come out. The talk about he hasn't got a bank in. I don't want to go sort of revisit stuff with Weed. I thought he played great. I thought that's exactly what he needs to do. I mean, if you look at the numbers between him and T-Mac in this game, they're almost exactly the same. Credit to Weed, he had 2 more contested marks, were 2-0 than T-Mac. Watching live, T-Mac does a lot more running, but up and down the ground, and he's lost his agility, T-Mac. So I think that really stands out. His sort of lateral movement wasn't great last year, and it's probably even less so this year. But he's like a train. He runs the same speed for the whole match, and he gets up and down the ground. You could never accuse him of not making those second efforts. And I thought they're sort of different. People on Demonland had different takes on what Goody's comments were about Weed after the game, and where he pumped him up and said that he did the things that he needs to do, the intensity, spoiling, bring the ball, 2 goals directly from him competing and bring the ball to ground, kicked a goal himself. So Goody was on the money, but I read them as more about they're the things that the non-negotiables. These are the things, the contests you've got to bring to the game. So you can go back to Casey. You're not far away from senior selection. Keep working on those things, and that you'll get your crack. And he may well. He's definitely more agile than T-Mac. So, but just on the T-Mac hasn't done anything wrong. So it's not like, he kicked 4 goals Weed a couple of weeks ago, but it's not like he's dominated so obviously that T-Mac is left in his wake. Quite the contrary. And I think that there's a couple of things that I saw with, I think, where he's still got to work on it, Weed. And again, I don't want to get down on him, but with 10 minutes 22 on the clock in that last quarter, Weed was 1-on-2 after Track had cleared a defensive 50 with a sort of barrel into space. And it was just one of those clearing kicks that we do so often, and it left Weed in a contest with two Giants players. They won the ball, which they were always probably going to 2-on-1, but Weed got around the Giants player who was shepherding, but just wasn't desperate enough to put pressure on the Giants player who had it, and he was able to kick up the field and hit a target. Whereas so many of the other players with that desperate lunge, even if they don't actually, or pressure act, even if they don't touch them, seems to so often just do enough to cause a turnover. And as we've talked about, we're a turnover team. We're all about the turnover, and it's those little acts that create turnovers, even if you don't touch him. And he just wasn't switched on, and it was like he took half a second to realise, I could get to this player, but it wasn't instinctive. And you compare that to the desperation made it in that end of the third quarter with those 2 desperate acts. That's the difference in intensity. And then with about 7 minutes to go, Taylor muscled him out and read the ball too easily against Weed. He dropped the mark, and we ended up crumbing it and getting it forward, and we ended up getting a goal from it. But it was that sort of contest where he's just got to show a bit more intensity. I think he played great, but I think he'll go back to Casey, and they'll give him those things to focus in on. And T-Mac's the incumbent, and he'll stay in. So one change this week, unless there's some injuries. Brown comes in for Weed.
Now, let's turn our attention to our opposition. I haven't watched the Tigers so much this season. Their only 2 wins have come against teams we've easily dispatched this season, and their losses have come against teams that did not even play finals in 2021. Big man, is their dynasty over? Do they have anything in their arsenal that is likely to worry us?
They definitely have. Definitely in their arsenal that they have to worry us. I mean, they'll, I think their dynasty or their dynasty, whichever side of the South Australian border you're on, is over. I mean, it's interesting because are they rebuilding? They've brought in younger players, but they've lost some of their key things that make them a premiership threat. So I think that if they do make finals, it'll be at the bottom end of the 8, and so they're no threat for the grand final. So you'd suggest that their dynasty is well and truly over, and whether they can rebuild. They're just like us. Their whole game plan is built on running, defensive running, and winning that post clearance contested ball. And they're been nowhere near it except in the win. So they've gone loss, win, loss, win, loss. They beat the Dogs, of course. So on their day they can beat any team with that intensity. The question is, they bring their full intensity and we don't. Of course, there's a risk, but we're in that spot where you're pretty confident, aren't you, Andy, that every time we play, we're going to be playing upwards of 80% of our intensity. The other thing about the Tigers is that they've given up 100 points now in all bar 2 games, and they won those 2 games. But defensively, that was one of their hallmarks. They were like us, very hard to score against. And they've been opened up time and time again. They had Tarrant, who got completely towed up by Taylor, and Himmelberg was also dominant in that game. That was a really eye-opener. Adelaide were harder at the ball at the end. They ran harder. They were fitter. They had the Burgess sprinkle on them. They really ran over the top of Richmond. That would have been a very dispiriting loss for the Tigers. The things that they prided on themselves on, they've got new players coming into the system who have to learn it, but their quality's dropped off. So whilst some of their systems probably aren't working as well. And the obvious one's defense without Grimes in that defensive back six. They look really thin for talls down there. And, you know, I think that they'll super struggle against our tall setup, though. You know, I can't see them stopping Brown, you know, T-Mac, Jackson when he's pushing forward, Gorney when he's pushing forward. They just don't have the height. So their systems aren't what they were. They'll bring the intensity for, you know, I hate to say this, or maybe this is their grand final almost, whereas years ago this was, you know, they were the benchmark we were looking at. Now
Queen's birthday used to be our grand final, so happy to.
Yeah, that's right. So,
I'm happy to troll some Richmond fans by telling them that that's their grand final, but they've got those
so the
three
question
premierships.
for them is, can they score enough against us? Because you know they've got to keep us to. Realistically, they won't keep us to 60. They've got to keep us to 70 to have any chance of winning this game. I don't think their defensive system and they're pick and choosing a bit. They're weak, but they're like a team that's. I've heard this sort of analogy of like an old champion who can get up. So I think there's very little chance of Melbourne going to any game underestimating our performance. If you just got to listen to what Goody talks about. He's all over this, saying that, you know, there's no disrespect for any team. We've got a model that we've based and then moved on from Richmond, but so, you know, they've got a similar game. They'll look to make it very hard for us to score. They'll attack us. You know, we'll have to shut down Lynch. We'll have to make sure Rewalt doesn't get a look in. You know, again, they've got a big question mark of what do they do in the ruck? You know, do they just run down Curvis? They'll have to think about bringing Soldo back in, surely to match our two ruckmen. So, you know, they definitely can trouble us, you know, but I think that I expect us to win pretty comfortably, and we might even be up for the game in the sense of, you know, maybe it felt like that against the Giants. It was like we were going to, once we got on that roll in the third quarter, we weren't going to stop. So maybe we'll get another shot at it like that. But yeah, I'd definitely be wary of them. And if, as I said, they've gone loss, win, loss, win, loss. So on that alone, they're due a win.
Yeah, I'm still excited about the prospect of letting some Richmond supporters know about their grand final. Hope it doesn't backfire.
Right. I think one we can definitely use is it's their grand final against us. So.
Yeah, it's not obviously not our home game, so we'll be sitting amongst the unwashed masses up at the top deck of the Olympic stand this week.
Are you going?
I am. Have going.
You got tickets?
I do. I had to buy tickets.
You've worked it out. It seems to be causing a great deal of consternation, the whole ticketing.
I don't know. It's
good to see you've worked it out.
Well, it's funny because some of my family's memberships are home and away games, so I really I did actually struggle for a bit, but I just ended up buying general admission in the end because it was getting a little bit frustrating because they don't make it so clear exactly what you have to do, whether you use the barcodes. I don't know. I worked it out in the end.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I mean, it's amazing to think, isn't it? This time last year, this game coming up, we were talking about it on the podcast being, you know, a great opportunity to benchmark ourselves against the team that perhaps was on the way down, but, you know, that had been a juggernaut, really. So it was really our chance to benchmark ourselves against the nominal best. So now it's the other way around.
And if you remember,
just within the 12 months time.
If you remember, it was the Tigers that sort of got the jump on us. I think they'd kicked 2 or 3 goals before we had opened our account. And they actually, you can pinpoint in that game, the genesis probably of our premiership tilt was Spargo running down, I think it was Hooley in the middle of the ground, tackling him. And from there, we sort of turned it around and didn't look back. And didn't really look back.
That fantastic goal to the punt road end. And
for half time.
I heard Track talk about that game being the point in time which the group started to really believe they could win a flag. So, yeah, as I say, it's crazy to think that was 12 months ago and the two teams are in sort of completely opposite space, but it was a huge win. And, I think that they will come out still looking to put a stamp on this game, the D's, and to make sure that, to be ruthless and make sure that the Tigers know there's a new sheriff in town, and it's the Demons. So I'm super looking forward to it. It was spectacular last year, and hopefully the weather's nice and we get a similar sort of crowd as we did last year.
Well, the crowd doesn't sort of matter to us because we're not taking the gate receipts, but it's always good to play in front of a big crowd. We do have a caller on the line. I believe it's our good friend Terence. Terence, how are you?
Yep.
Terence, I just lost you for a second. Start again, Terence.
Can you get?
I can. It is a little bit...
can you hear me now?
That sounds perfect. Terence, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just dropped it out a little bit. I don't want to keep you guys, so if this is not going to work, then I'll hang up. But can you hear me all right?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, so terrific session today, as it has been for the last few. I've wanted to call a couple of times, but just wasn't able to. So, firstly, I just really want to compliment the level of analysis that you guys go through. It's terrific for me sitting over here, the other side of the world, where I don't get this kind of analysis, even from the commentators. And I did want to pick up on the commentators. I was going to say something last week, and I realised we can't control the commentators, Andy, but I'm really sick and tired of hearing about, T-Mac was out of the club and, he's become a meat eater. And, I mean, does Hamish, whatever his name is, have anything else to say? And similarly with, so many of the other anal comments that you just sit there and thinking, there's got to be better commentators out there, not least of which is Daisy, of course, but got to be better commentators out there. So I'm just wondering if either of you have any views about that, even though we can't control it.
Well, have you ever heard that Scott Pendlebury apparently has a basketball background? Because I've heard that 3 million times from the commentators. So they latch on to sort of one or two things that they know about a particular player, and they just constantly wheel it out. B-Man?
Don't get me started, Terence. Terence, don't get me started, though. There's not enough time now for suffice to say that I've heard Tim Watson's been charged with crimes against the English language. So, but yeah, don't get me started. So, Job Watson, I should say. Is it Job? Whatever. Yeah, Job Watson.
The son, yes.
Yes, the same. So that drives me insane. I'm trying to not let it upset me so much, and being able to get to the games. I have to say that's one of the pleasures. So.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that you got to go to it. I wanted to ask you about Bedford. We haven't talked to about him very much, and he just does seem to be playing really good football at the moment. I know that we don't change the team, but I'd just really be interested in your thoughts as to where there might be an opportunity for him.
I'll let B-Man answer in a second, but I would say it's all dependent on injury. Have a look at last year. B-Man talked about it a bit before with Jordan. Basically all year was the sub, got a bit of a chance to get in, and Sparrow then went to the stub, and then it sort of changed around a little bit. But it seems that they don't change things, so that I can only see him getting a look in if one of Cozzy or Spargo, maybe Nibbler, gets an injury. But other than that, I can't see him squeezing in. They won't. I don't believe they'll. As long as we're playing at Casey and he's getting full games, I just can't see them shoehorning him in, even unless they rest someone as well. But I don't know, B-Man, what are your thoughts on that?
No, exactly. They'll do exactly what they did last year. If he gets his chance, he gets his chance. I reckon, you only have to look at the grand final. The fact that they didn't bring Jordan onto the ground, again, it goes back to my thing I said at the top of the show about discipline. I heard Goody talk about it, saying, well, we didn't have an injury. Of course they could have feigned one. They had players, Steve May had a 2-inch tear in his hamstring. But it's the same with Bedford. They're not going to shoehorn anyone in. He'll keep being a medi-sup each week. And he's a small forward, sort of cross into, say, Nibbler's really the player who he would replace in that side. Obviously, Spargo and Cozzy too. But probably Nibbler is the closest player in the side to his skill set, and he'll just wait his turn. And if he goes through the whole season, it wouldn't shock me if he's medi-sub for the whole season. It would just be, they repeating things that worked last year, they're repeating this year. So he'll play a lot of games at Casey, and I mean, all the likelihood he may get his shot. But yeah, I agree with Andy. They won't be looking to squeeze him in or drop someone for the sake of it or resting someone. If he gets his shot, all well and good. If not, he'll wait his turn.
He also, if someone does get injured in game, he's really got to take his chances when he gets them. So if he does get onto the field, he's really got to take that opportunity. But as well, do the team things too.
I'm sure you're right. Okay, I'll let you go with the last question. Have we heard anything more about Angus Brayshaw's contract? I must admit I worry a little bit about that. It'd be sad to lose him.
I haven't heard anything. I'm still a little bit more worried about Luke Jackson just in terms of setting ourselves up for the future. It might be that we might have to lose someone. I would hate for it to be Angus, and I don't know if it will be, but yeah, it's an interesting one. But no, I haven't heard anything yet. B-Man, you heard any whispers?
No, but I haven't. My gut feeling is that I can't see Gus is sort of leaving. They'll come to terms on something. He doesn't strike me as a fella who's motivated by sort of success elsewhere or money or a different role. I mean, he's playing his best footy. So people talk about him being a mid. Well, he's won a premiership on the wing. People are talking about his redefining the role almost, his ability to drop back in the defensive side. I mean, that's basically what he's been doing all season. So, I think that I can't see him leaving. They'll come to terms. Jackson's the one that they'll be sweating on. But it raises the bigger question: is the struggle of any team that sort of how do you keep all your players together? All the great teams of players have had to take a haircut. Even who re-signed even Moore. I mean, I'm not saying Collingwood a great team, but Moore could have easily got more money elsewhere. But there's a lot to be said for being a one club player, and I reckon Gus is a sort of fellow who would put a fair bit of store in being a one club player, and he's obviously tasted the ultimate bit of luck. He'll get a couple more too.
All right.
I think I've lost the signal a little bit, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Terence.
Sure.
Good on you, Terence.
That was our good friend Terence, I believe in Belgium, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I think we'll wrap things up there, B-Man. Thank you for going solo with me tonight. George will be back next week, and as will B-Man, and maybe Terence will be back and give us a call. Enjoy the week at work, and we'll be back next week after the ANZAC Eve game. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons.